The United States is following that same pattern, stage by stage, grievance by grievance. It's almost like we're reading from a script written in blood and chaos. In 1789, France was the most powerful nation in Europe. Wealthy, cultured, and advanced, the government was overthrown within 5 years. The Tsar was beheaded, and the country descended into terror, where 40,000 people were executed for political crimes. In 1917, Russia was a vast empire. The Tsar ruled 180 million people. The military had just fought in World War I, and in 8 months, the entire regime collapsed. The Tsar was executed. The Bolsheviks took power, and 20 million would die in the Civil War and purges that followed. In 1959, Cuba was a prosperous Caribbean nation. American tourists, casinos, and a functioning economy. And in 2 years, Fidel Castro overthrew the government, nationalized everything, and turned the country into a communist dictatorship that lasted 60 years.
3 times, 3 revolutions, 3 moments when a seemingly stable government collapsed into chaos. And every time, the people in power never saw it coming. They thought they were untouchable. They thought the peasants would never rise. They thought the system was too strong to fall. They were wrong every single time. And right now, every warning sign that preceded those 3 revolutions is present in the United States. The wealth inequality, the government corruption, the loss of faith in institutions, and the rage building beneath the surface. We're not heading toward the pattern, we're in stage 4. And history says stages 5 and 6 come fast. This is the story of how revolutions happen, why governments never see them coming, and why the math says we're next. Before we go through the pattern, you need to understand what a revolution actually is. Not a protest, not a riot, not political change. A revolution is when the existing order is destroyed and replaced with something new, often something worse.
Revolutions don't happen because people are poor. Poverty has existed for all of human history. Revolutions happen when expectations exceed reality. When people believe they deserve better than what they have. When the gap between the elites and everyone else becomes so extreme that the social contract breaks. And, most importantly, when people lose faith that the system can fix itself, that the government, the courts, the elections, any of it will address their grievances. When peaceful reform becomes impossible, violent revolution becomes inevitable. That's not radical theory. That's John F. Kennedy's exact words. Those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable. And history proves it every single time. France, Russia, Cuba, 3 different centuries, 3 different ideologies, but the same 6-stage sequence. Let's look at how it actually played out. Let's start with the mother of all modern revolutions, France, 1789. In the 1780s, France was the center of European civilization. Paris was the cultural capital of the world. French was the language of diplomacy. The arts, philosophy, and science all flourishing. King Louis XVI sat on the throne. The monarchy had ruled France for 800 years. It seemed eternal, unshakable. But beneath the surface, the rot was total.
This is stage 1 of every revolution: extreme wealth inequality. In 1789, France had 27 million people divided into 3 estates. The first estate, the clergy, owned 10% of the land and paid no taxes. The second estate, the nobility, about 400,000 people, owned 25% of the land and paid almost no taxes. The third estate, everyone else. 26 million peasants, workers, and middle class owned 65% of the land and paid all of the taxes. Let that sink in. 1.5% of the population paid no taxes, while 98.5% carried the entire burden. And it wasn't just taxes. The nobility had privileges. They could hunt on peasant land. They could demand labor.
They lived in palaces while peasants starved. By 1788, a bad harvest caused bread prices to spike. Bread was 88% of a peasant's budget. When prices doubled, people couldn't eat. But the nobility? Still eating five-course meals, still throwing lavish parties at Versailles. The gap between the rich and everyone else wasn't just economic. It was a complete disconnect from reality. This is stage 2, government corruption and incompetence. King Louis XVI was not evil. He was weak and indecisive. France was bankrupt from fighting wars, including helping America in the Revolutionary War. The government owed billions. And Louis' solution? Borrow more, raise taxes on the peasants, and cut nothing. The nobility refused to pay taxes. The clergy refused. And when Louis tried to reform, they blocked him because the people with power would rather see the country burn than give up their privileges. Sound familiar? By 1789, France was in crisis. The government couldn't pay its debts. The people couldn't afford food. And Louis called the Estates General, a representative assembly that hadn't met in 175 years. He thought it would legitimize new taxes. Instead, it became the spark. This is stage 3, middle class destroyed and radicalized. The Third Estate, which included not just peasants, but also lawyers, merchants, and the educated middle class, demanded equal representation. They wanted one vote per person, not one vote per estate, which gave the nobility and clergy a 2-to-1 advantage. Louis refused. So, on June 17, 1789, the Third Estate declared itself the National Assembly. They locked themselves in a tennis court and vowed not to leave until France had a constitution. This is the moment when the middle class, the educated people who should be supporting the system, turn against it. When lawyers and merchants say the government is illegitimate, that's when revolution becomes inevitable. July 14, 1789, Parisians stormed the Bastille prison, a symbol of royal authority. They killed the guards, paraded their heads on pikes through the streets. The revolution had begun, and it escalated fast. This is stage 4, loss of faith in institutions. The monarchy, the church, and the courts all lost legitimacy. The National Assembly abolished feudalism, seized church lands, and declared the rights of men. But it wasn't enough. The radicals kept pushing.
Stage 5, revolutionary movement gains mass support. The Jacobins, led by Robespierre, demanded more extreme measures. They wanted to execute the king, redistribute all wealth, and purge the enemies of the revolution. And they gained popular support because the moderates had failed to deliver. The economy was still in crisis, food was still scarce, and people wanted blood. January 21st, 1793. King Louis XVI was beheaded by guillotine in public. His wife, Marie Antoinette, followed in October, and then the terror began. Stage 6, government overthrown, chaos follows. From 1793 to 1794, the Committee of Public Safety, led by Robespierre, executed 40,000 people, nobles, priests, political opponents, even fellow revolutionaries who weren't radical enough. They called it purifying the revolution. It was mass murder. The guillotine ran daily in Paris, public executions as entertainment, and the purges kept expanding. First the nobility, then the moderate revolutionaries, then anyone accused of counter-revolutionary thoughts. No trial, no evidence, just accusation and death. Robespierre himself was eventually executed by the same system he created because revolutions devour their own children, always. By 1799, France was exhausted. 10 years of chaos, economic collapse, war on all fronts, and Napoleon seized power in a coup, becoming emperor. The revolution, that began with liberty, equality, fraternity, ended with a military dictatorship that would drag Europe into 15 years of war.
The lesson of France: extreme inequality, plus government incompetence, plus loss of faith in institutions leads to revolution. And revolution leads to chaos, terror, and often dictatorship worse than what came before. Now, let's jump forward 128 years, Russia, 1917. By 1917, Russia was a backward empire ruled by Tsar Nicholas II. The Romanov dynasty had ruled for 300 years. And Russia was massive, 180 million people spanning from Europe to the Pacific. But beneath the imperial facade, the same rot. Stage 1. Extreme wealth inequality. The Tsar and nobility owned everything. The peasants, 80% of the population, owned nothing. They'd been freed from serfdom in 1861, but most still worked land owned by nobles, paying rent they couldn't afford. In the cities, factory workers labored 12, 14 hours a day for starvation wages. Child labor was common. Safety regulations didn't exist. Meanwhile, the Tsar lived in palaces. The nobility hosted balls that cost more than a peasant would earn in a lifetime. The gap wasn't just economic. It was feudal, medieval, and unsustainable. Stage 2. Government corruption and incompetence. Tsar Nicholas II was a disaster, weak, indecisive, and completely out of touch with reality. He believed in divine right, that God had chosen him to rule, and therefore no reform was necessary. When workers peacefully marched to the Winter Palace in 1905 to petition for better conditions, his guards opened fire. Hundreds were killed. Bloody Sunday. It destroyed any remaining faith that the Tsar cared about his people. Then came World War I. Russia entered in 1914, and it was a catastrophe. Millions of poorly equipped soldiers sent to die. Officers were incompetent, supply lines collapsed, soldiers fought without bullets, entire divisions surrendered because they had no ammunition. By 1917, Russia had suffered 3 million casualties. The army was deserting, the economy was collapsing, and the Tsar, still living in luxury, still making decisions based on advice from Rasputin, a mystical holy man who influenced the Tsarina.
February 1917. Bread riots in Petrograd, St. Petersburg. Women in bread lines started protesting. Workers joined them. The army was called in to restore order, but the soldiers refused to fire on the crowds. They mutinied. Stage 3. Middle class and military turn against the government. When the army won't defend you, the government is over. The Duma, Russia's parliament, demanded Nicholas abdicate, and on March 15, 1917, he did. After 300 years, the Romanov dynasty ended not with a war, but with a whimper. A provisional government took over, led by Alexander Kerensky. They promised reforms, elections, and a constitution, but they made a fatal mistake. They kept Russia in World War I. The soldiers wanted peace, the people wanted food, and the provisional government delivered neither. Stage 4. Loss of faith in institutions. The provisional government lost legitimacy within months. They were seen as weak, incompetent, and beholden to foreign powers. And into that vacuum stepped Vladimir Lenin and the Bolsheviks. Stage 5. Revolutionary movement gains mass support. Lenin promised 3 things: peace, land, bread. End the war. Redistribute the nobility's land to peasants. Feed the people. Simple, direct. And the Bolsheviks built a disciplined, revolutionary organization ready to seize power. October 25, 1917, the Bolsheviks launched a coup. They stormed the Winter Palace, and within hours, centuries of monarchy vanished. The Romanov dynasty, which had ruled Russia for 300 years, was gone.
Lenin promised to give power to the people. He spoke of workers owning the means of production, of peasants seizing land from the aristocrats, dismantled the old order, confiscating land, factories, banks, and businesses. Farmers were declared enemies of the state for keeping their own grain. Workers were executed for striking. Freedom became treason. Lenin called it the dictatorship of the proletariat. In reality, it was the dictatorship of one party, his. By the time Lenin died, the Soviet Union was a police state.
But his successor, Joseph Stalin, would take it further than anyone imagined. Stalin saw enemies everywhere, in villages, in factories, even in his own party. He created a vast system of fear: secret police, informants, midnight arrests. Entire families vanished. Millions were sent to the Gulag, frozen labor camps where they mined, chopped, and built until they collapsed. The lucky ones died quickly. The unlucky ones survived long enough to wish they hadn't. Stalin industrialized the Soviet Union by enslaving it. He starved Ukraine to feed the cities, killing millions in a man-made famine. He purged his generals, scientists, and thinkers, anyone who could threaten his rule. And yet, through sheer brutality, he turned a peasant nation into a superpower. When the Nazis invaded, it was the Soviet people, not Stalin's system, who saved their country with unimaginable sacrifice. 27 million died. And when the smoke cleared, Stalin emerged as a godlike figure, the man who defeated Hitler.
But victory didn't bring freedom. It brought the empire. Eastern Europe fell under Soviet control, from Berlin to Bucharest. Iron curtains, puppet governments, secret police, the same nightmare repeated across half the world. And yet, millions still believed in the dream. Western intellectuals praised the Soviet experiment. They didn't see the mass graves beneath the snow. Then came the Cold War, an arms race, a space race, a propaganda war between two empires convinced they were saving humanity. The Soviets built nukes, satellites, and spies. The Americans built more nukes, more satellites, more spies. Both sides claimed to stand for peace. Both sides were prepared for annihilation. And through it all, ordinary people suffered, rationed, and obeyed, told that sacrifice was patriotic, that poverty was noble, that their suffering served history. By the 1970s, the cracks were visible. The economy stagnated, corruption spread, the black market thrived. The slogans no longer inspired, they mocked reality. The Soviet people had learned to live double lives, one public, loyal, and silent, one private, cynical, and afraid. Truth had died long ago, replaced by propaganda and fear. When an empire must lie to survive, its end has already begun. In 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. It was supposed to be a quick victory, another proof of socialist strength. Instead, it became a quagmire. A superpower was humbled by peasants with rifles. The war dragged on for 10 years, draining blood, money, and morale. Mothers buried sons for a cause no one believed in. The world watched, and the myth of Soviet invincibility crumbled. By the mid-1980s, even the Kremlin knew the truth. The system was dying. Mikhail Gorbachev tried to save it, introducing reforms, easing censorship, loosening control. But when people tasted freedom, they didn't want reform, they wanted to escape. One by one, the satellite states broke away: Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia. Then the Berlin Wall fell. And finally, in 1991, the Soviet Union itself disintegrated. A nation that once ruled 1/6 of the earth ceased to exist. It had promised paradise. It delivered ruin. Empires rarely collapse from outside attack. They rot from within, from lies, fear, and the slow death of truth. The Soviet Union didn't fall because the West was strong. It fell because it stopped believing in itself. Because it replaced reality with ideology. Because it silenced those who warned of decline. Because it punished honesty and rewarded obedience. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. Today we see the same symptoms spreading again, not in Moscow but across the world. Governments that lie to their people.
Economies built on debt, not production. Citizens are more afraid of speaking the truth than believing lies. Every empire thinks it's different, that its power will last forever. But the laws of decline are universal. Stage 1 is idealism, the dream of building a perfect world. Stage 2 is control, silencing those who disagree. Stage 3 is corruption, when power serves itself. Stage 4 is decay, when lies replace truth. And Stage 5 is collapse, when the system can no longer pretend. The Soviet Union completed all 5 stages. So did Rome. So did every empire before them. The question is, how many stages remain for us? Because history doesn't forgive arrogance. It only waits for proof. And when the proof arrives, it's always too late. Stage 5 is here, and we're closer than most people realize. Stage 6 is what no one wants to think about because Stage 6 is chaos. In France, 40,000 were executed during the Terror. In Russia, 10 million dead in the Civil War. In Cuba, a dictatorship for 60 years. American exceptionalism says it can't happen here. We're too stable, too wealthy, too democratic. That's what they said in France. Russia was an empire that had lasted 300 years. Cuba was prosperous and modern, and all 3 collapsed. The pattern doesn't care about exceptionalism.
So what would Stage 6 look like in America? No one knows exactly, but history gives us clues. Political violence escalates, not riots, organized violence, assassinations, or insurgency. The military and police fracture. Some units side with the government, others with the revolutionaries. Supply chains break down, food shortages, fuel shortages. The economy collapses because no one trusts anything. States tried to secede or refuse to recognize federal authority, and foreign powers interfere. China, Russia, they love to see America burn. The chaos could last years. Millions could die. And what emerges on the other side won't be the America we knew. It could be authoritarian. It could be fractured into regions. It could be something worse. That's Stage 6. And the pattern says once you're in Stage 4, it's very difficult to stop. 3 revolutions, 3 identical patterns. France, Russia, Cuba. Each time the elites never saw it coming. Each time they thought they were safe. Each time they thought the peasants would never rise. And each time the gap between rich and poor, the government corruption, the loss of faith, it all combined into an explosion that destroyed the existing order. The United States is in Stage 4. The wealth gap is worse than France in 1789. The government is as dysfunctional as Russia in 1917. The faith in institutions is as broken as Cuba in 1958. And the pattern says Stages 5 and 6 are coming. Maybe we can stop it. Maybe we can reform before revolution. Maybe the system can fix itself. But the pattern says otherwise. The history says otherwise. And the warning signs are everywhere. 3 times it happened. Each time they thought they were different. Each time the pattern won. If this opened your eyes to where we actually are in the cycle, subscribe to HistoMirror. Because when Stage 5 begins, when the revolutionary movements gain mass support, you'll want to understand what's happening and why.